My name's Paul. My wife has got DID, and my role is as a supportive partner to her. We've got 3 children, so obviously as a couple of parents looking after those, there's a need for support sometimes when my wife's struggling to look after them. So it's important that we can carve that up and continue to have a normal life with them as much as is possible. I'm also working full time, and therefore I have responsibilities there too. And in terms of the support that I need, I think it is around just having time for me, being able to be the husband I need to be the partner, and to try and avoid stepping into the role of being a carer and being a sort of rescuer, which sometimes that can be an easy role to step into, but it's one that's important to avoid, to be able to treat my wife fairly as a person, even though she is struggling at times because of DID diagnosis. I think it is very difficult. At times, some of the ways of coping are about remembering the perspective of it, that there will be many parts to my wife. In fact, some parts that don't really think they are my wife, and therefore to perhaps take that into account when you're having conversations. In the heat of the moment, that often doesn't happen. You don't often do it right. I don't do it right. But it's about realising that sometimes it's better to walk away and to come back at a later stage and talk about things from a different perspective, and things will look very different. So that's some of how to deal with it, I've found. But it is hard not to react at times and not to say things that you later regret. We have been able to talk and to identify what might have gone wrong, to identify where something may have been misunderstood between us, to recognise some of the warning signs of where someone might be, recognise a time where a part of my wife might come out, and to be able to see how I might respond to that. And I think to get permission that walking away isn't walking out on something. Sometimes it is about allowing a bit of space for things to cool down. And I think we've been able to talk about that and understand that bit, and to plan a little, try and plan ahead and try and think ahead, and think about things like planning around the children, planning about those responsibilities as well, to make sure that if there is a particular difficult time, I'm able to take my share of responsibilities there. It is quite a roller coaster in terms of what's happening within therapy, and clearly there is a need for boundaries, for confidentiality, for that very important relationship between therapist and the person with DID, my partner in this case. It is something that then means when you experience the results of that therapy in terms of how good or bad it's gone on any particular time, and how impacting that therapy is in that person's daily life, and how that affects the rest of what's happening within the household they're part of. Yet rightly, you're no direct part of that, but you do get the ripples that come away from it, the waves that smash sometimes in terms of how that person copes, whether that is at times coming home and just going to sleep and not really functioning outside of the bare minimums, or at other times coming back and feeling very high and responding in ways that perhaps lock them into parts of their persona, particular personalities. It is really tangled in terms of how it can be, and you're reliant on your interpretation of what's happening and what your partner tells you. And if they don't want to tell you, that's fine, they don't have to. But then you're left with still the effects of it, without necessarily any understanding. When we were just really discovering about this, we would have conversations that she would then not remember, and it could lead often to arguments because she was sure she hadn't said things, and I know that I'd had those conversations and I'd told her those things, and therefore that was really difficult. And we laugh about it now, but it was really hard at the time. In terms of parts that are perhaps not as invested in us as a couple, or perhaps don't really have any understanding of that can be difficult too. And it is quite difficult when you're sitting talking with somebody who looks just like the person you're married to, who you've grown with for all of these years, to have a conversation where that person really doesn't seem to know you or respond to you or have an engagement with you that's the same. It is quite off-putting, and initially it felt quite scary at times, sometimes still does, and particularly because within DID it's not necessary that if you've got a person who's female with DID that all of their alters and parts will be female. So to have a conversation with somebody who's coming across as a male is quite odd, and interesting. And I think it's about whenever you get the opportunity, and perhaps they're back in a more settled place, a place where there's more equilibrium, to actually have a conversation about that. And I know for different people, their connection between the parts will be, so sometimes they will have total communication, even though different parts turned up and started speaking, they will still understand what's happened and they will have a recollection of that. Sometimes people don't have any recollection whatsoever. So it does depend how the system's set up and the levels of communication there is internally. And it can be hard sometimes to talk about what's been said. But I think at the end of the day, the best thing is that you do talk about it, and you can talk about it, and you try and be as open as possible. I think that communication between us is complex all of the time. I think complex in any relationship anyway. Probably more so when both of you bring in so many different things. It is hard sometimes, because there has to be times where I just sort of step up straight away and take over when there's a need. I can do that when there isn't one as well. And so there's miscommunication. And there's times where, because of all the struggles that are going on, or the relative peace that's going on for my partner, it's about you respecting that actually they may not want to communicate. So there will be my needs, which are to know this, that and the other, and I want to know about all of those things. And yet that's not either because there's a struggle going on or because talking about it would actually create tensions that aren't there at the moment. Sometimes communication is the last thing that you actually need. And it's just a constant struggle to work out what's best for both of you. And I think within any relationship, you learn each other's ebbs and flows. You learn that one person's quite overt, wants to talk lots, an extrovert, and another person's sort of quite quiet and an introvert and wants to be quiet. When you've got somebody who's experiencing DID, they've probably got multiple parts of that, in terms of quiet parts, noisy parts, shy parts, very loud and gregarious parts, and therefore that is much more of a challenge. And I'm sure everyone will find it different in each of the partnerships that are out there, and whether those partnerships are partnerships that are sort of professional between therapists and carers, professional carers and people with DID, or it's others in relationships and in families. Communication is obviously essential, but it is always a challenge, and you've never got it sorted. And I personally don't think that you progressing in therapy necessarily guarantees that communication's better. I think every day's a new day, and every day communication is one of the big issues that you have to sort out. Over the years, with the therapist that my wife's had, there's been times where she's been in crisis and really, really struggling, and there was a contract at times which sort of allowed for me to be able to ring them almost like 999 to say, she's struggling, can you get in touch? And no more than that, necessarily, not to enter into a dialogue where they share about what they know about the particular struggles that were happening at the time, but at least to let them know that, and that really has got to be with that person's agreement, because I think the difficulty is you can then get into a situation where someone in my position could become really controlling and continually keep ringing and saying there's a crisis, and sort of almost intrude as to the stage where their partner's at, because the complexity that comes along with someone who's got DID, and the amazingness of it as well, means that you could actually cause more harm than good by interfering. Yet there has got to be times where you are able to support, and where you can actually see that if someone is really struggling, that they need help, and that help may not be you. And therefore, if that help needs to be coming from their therapist, how does that get communicated? If that person's not in a position where they feel strong enough or able enough to go to the therapist because of how they're struggling, surely one of the roles of being a supporting partner is to say, you look like you're in pain, I'll see if someone else can help you. So that did happen. Hasn't happened lately, but it has happened in the past. I think it was a positive thing at the time, and I think it was something where maybe not immediately, but sort of overall when the bigger picture was seen, I think it was something that was seen as to be of benefit by my wife. The wider family is with that person 24/7, outside of the 1 or 2 or more hours a week that person is having therapy. And yet, what happens in that therapy session can often have a big impact. So it's difficult, and I've got no easy answers as to how, because you can't breach someone's confidentiality, and clearly it has to be left to the person who's receiving therapy as to how much they communicate, if at all. So it's a difficult one, and I think it's one where it then means you as a partner do really need support, and you need support from someone who understands about DID. You don't need someone who will just justify what's been happening for you and your partner as something completely different, which is often unhelpful when they define it as other things. You need someone who's at least got a grasp. But obviously that can't be your partner's therapist. But it has got to be somebody who can understand some of the things you're going through and understand some of the things you're explaining, has that same frame of reference, and supports you. And that isn't available very easily. Finding someone who even understands about DID is difficult, who even believes in it. And finding ways to actually then, that's a huge financial burden then to actually fund all of that, because you can rarely get support for the partner from the authorities to fund their therapy, let alone for their supporting partner then, be it husband, wife or whatever role you fulfil. But it is something that is vital, and it's something I don't think I've had enough of, and it's something that I know I need to find in order to deal with it, because otherwise it is really hard not to self-destruct. I think that a really important chance and opportunity to have is to be able to talk to other people in my position. whether that's men or women, in this situation. And probably those opportunities aren't that frequent, although they have come about through a variety of organisations and opportunities, meetings, open meetings, things like that. And I found it really, really helpful, because I think one of the biggest issues here is that you feel so isolated. You feel that no one could really understand what's happening. You feel for your partner, and you don't want to be talking to just anyone about what's going on for them and the struggles they have and some of the hard times that there are. So it's hard enough to talk to anyone about that, to find somebody who actually understands that a bit and won't be judging and won't be critical and won't be sort of condescending or dismissive is really helpful. And I have had that opportunity of talking with other partners and understanding that we have similarities, we have common experiences, but as well we have really unique different experiences, because each person is so different in the way that this whole experience manifests itself for them. Obviously, therefore, the supporting partner's experience is really different as well. That opportunity is one that is vital, and quite how you allow it to happen more and more, I don't know. But it is something that I found really helpful. And I hope I've been helpful and sort of supportive to those others as well, because I know that in talking with them I found support and found some comfort at often quite difficult times. I personally find it really tricky to find time to actually do things for me, and I know that I need to do that, and I need to do it better. And I think I would encourage people to be able to find that time. So outside of finding a therapist who you can talk to discuss some of your challenges, to actually just find time to have fun. It is important. It's something I don't invest in enough, and I think that then means that I burn out quicker and I struggle more. Different people are different in how they do it, but I think if you can, to be able to plan in some part of your week and your life rather than just be entirely reactive is important. And to work out that you do invest in yourself, that you do look after you, because otherwise you're not going to be much good for anyone else if you haven't actually looked after yourself. And to get to know that you is more than just the sum of everything you do. So someone told me once, being is more important than doing. And I think that's true. I don't think I live it, but it's a good thing to have, to just be who you are before you start doing stuff. And then when you do things for other people, remember to do things for yourself as well.